So we've been in this series called Deep Tracks, and it's really been this exploration of our spirituality and the different turns that our spiritual journeys can take through song. Through some songs that maybe have been meaningful to us throughout the years, maybe a couple songs that are new to us. So I want to take us a little bit, go back through this journey. Week 1, we looked at I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For by U2. And what we found was maybe it's okay that we still haven't found what we're looking for, because maybe the journey is where the joy of life comes through. The next week, we looked at the song What Was I Made For by Billie Eilish from the movie Barbie. And what we found is maybe to ask this question from a true and authentic place, what was I made for? Maybe we find a deeper, more truer answer when we leave the familiar, when we leave the safe and the known. And then last week, we looked at John Lennon's Imagine, and really honing in on this idea that this imaginative capacity we have in our hearts, in our minds, is where the change in the world and the change in our lives can come through. And so today, as we've shared so far in the service, the song for today is Both Sides Now. And really, it's going to be a look at how, as we move through our journey, as we evolve along the way, how are we changed? How does our perceptions change? How does the way that we experience life change? Because when you think about a time when you might have said, I was beginning on my spiritual journey, like I was setting out on the path. How many of us are the same person that we were back then, right? And so we're going to be looking at this song written by Joni Mitchell when she was 23 years old in 1966. And she's lived a lot of life since then. She stopped performing in 2000, and then she suffered a brain aneurysm in 2015, and there were questions of whether or not she would ever perform again, let alone walk again. But she has powered through, and in the last few years, Joni started to perform again, and there's something really special that happens, and I think a lot of people have responded to when she performs this song, Both Sides Now, because it's a song about looking back at your life and seeing how you have evolved, how you have changed, how you have grown. And so as she sings this song that she wrote so long ago, you can tell that the way she sings it has evolved and has changed. This song and this title, Both Sides Now. What's interesting is if you actually go through and we look at, and we're going to look at the song today, but as we already listened to it, you can see there's actually 3 stages of life being outlined in this song. And I couldn't help but be reminded of, I don't know if you remember these. These are called vinyl records. You know, there was a time when this was one of the only ways you could listen to music, right? And then they went away, and then they came back, which is so exciting. And now, actually, I don't know if you know this, but this is one of the best ways for an artist to make money nowadays is actually through their vinyl sales, because streaming, you don't really make much money from that. Anyway, that's a total aside. But we have this A side of life, right? When we're young, the naivete of youth, optimism, and then something happens, right? And at some point we go into this B side of life, a time maybe of cynicism, right? Maybe a time where we let go of old beliefs, right? Some ideas that failed us or people that failed us, right? And so we shift into this different way of being. But what I love about this song and about this idea of both sides now is that there is a third stage, and it's a stage when we can recognize the value in both. We can hold both and understand how they've both have brought us to different important places in life. And we move beyond an either-or mentality and into a both-and type of mentality where we can hold space for the mystery. I brought one of my cheap vinyls, so I'm just going to do that. So let's start with that first verse where she talks about clouds. Rows and flows of angel hair and ice cream castles in the air and feather canyons everywhere. I've looked at clouds that way, but now they only block the sun. They rain and snow on everyone. So many things I would have done, but clouds got in my way. How many of us can recognize these different areas of life, these different aspects of our journey where the way we feel about certain things has completely changed over time? I remember when I was young, and I had the opportunity to go to this magical place. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Legoland, California. And there was this ride called the Legoland Driving School. And, as you can imagine, you're going around in these go-karts. And I thought that what I was learning that day would actually be valuable in my driving career. But as I look back, there's nothing that I learned that I can actually apply today. However, the excitement when I left that ride, the thing I was most excited about in life was getting my driver's license, right? I was thinking, gosh, then I will have made it. And honestly, a few decades plus later, I'm not all that excited about my driver's license anymore, right? Driving is kind of a point A to point B kind of thing. I'm sorry to say, I've lost the mystique and wonder of it. And, there are times where I'm more stressed out than anything when I'm driving, right? Anyone else? Okay. I also remember my first time on a plane. It was magical, okay? I was a little kid, and so, I think the seat probably felt so much bigger back then because I was smaller. And they're bringing me soda and snacks, and I'm in the sky. So it was just this wonderful thing. Again, sorry to say, but nowadays, I feel like, there are many aspects of traveling on a plane that have become a bit of a chore. I like to just get in my seat, and I'm kind of like, okay, let's wrap this up, And lastly, clouds. Clouds have even been this way in my life. When I grew up in Southern California, clouds were a welcome sight, protection from the sun. And then when I moved to the Pacific Northwest, clouds became my mortal enemy. We go through these different stages for these different things in our life. For you, it might be something completely different. Maybe for you, right, you went into your career and you had this excitement and this awe and this wonder and this feeling like maybe I can make a difference, right? And then something happened, disappointments have come, and you maybe feel completely differently, right? Maybe it's about a place that you lived. It at one point held nostalgia and all this kind of innocence and wonder for you, and it changed. Your feelings about it evolved and changed. What's interesting is on either side of this journey, in that first stage of just kind of childlike awe and wonder, and this second stage of cynicism and negativity, on either side, we feel as though we know, right? We know the answer. We've figured it out. And what's interesting is when we move into this negative side, or this kind of focusing on the disappointments, focusing on how things have failed us, what we often believe in those moments is that, well, this is just growing up, right? This is just what becoming wise and mature is realizing how disappointing things are in life. And the problem is that we get stuck because we believe it to be truth. But as the Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron says, the truth you believe and cling to makes you unavailable to hear anything new. So it's really easy to get stuck in these stages because we close off to new ideas and to the fact that there even is another stage. But as Joni shows us, there in fact is. I've looked at clouds from both sides now, from up and down, and still somehow. It's clouds' illusions, I recall. I really don't know clouds at all. This has been my experience just moving here. I fell in love with clouds again, Now, when the clouds come, they're like protection from the sun, but I also have like a healthy respect for them because they might mean that a monsoon is coming, and it's like, get inside, stay safe. But we have this movement that we go through. Stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. Some people have said it's enchantment, disenchantment, re-enchantment. We return to this place where we can hold both sides and recognize the value of them. We move from the certainty, right, that we know all the answers, we know how things are supposed to work out, into a humility and a renewed appreciation for things. Rumi said this: sell your cleverness and buy bewilderment. We think we're so clever in those early stages. We think we know it all. And yet, the real currency is to be bewildered, right? It's not a fear sort of bewilderment. It's a bewilderment that holds space for the mystery, right? Which actually allows in more joy, more appreciation for the moment. Moons and Junes and Ferris wheels, the dizzy dancing way that you feel. As every fairy tale comes real, I've looked at love that way. But now it's just another show, and you leave them laughing when you go. And if you care, don't let them know. Don't give yourself away. How many of us have experienced love as both fairy tale and as heartbreak, right? It can be both. Maybe it doesn't even have to be romantic love, right? Think about a family member or a friend who is sometimes larger than life, and other times they can disappoint you, right? And we all have felt enough pain that sometimes you want to cling to this idea that this feeling of disappointment, of wanting to protect ourselves and close off, well, this is just what I need to do because this is the truth that I have discovered. See, if we're honest, we've all been let down and disappointed and had our heart broken enough that we've pulled back some trust, right? Maybe we've closed off because something happens in our journey and we get hurt and we naturally want to protect ourselves. But if we can move past this, we find that I've looked at love from both sides now, from give and take, and still somehow, it's love's illusions that I recall. I really don't know love at all. That we might be able to say, I've seen it all, right? I've experienced the heartbreak and I've experienced the joy, and the conclusion that I've come to, that love is a mystery, right? I don't know why things happen the way they do. I don't know why people hurt each other. I don't know why I've been so fortunate for some things and have had other heartbreak happen, but I can hold that both can coexist. I can hold both being true at the same time. And what this does is it expands our heart. It expands our capacity for love. Tears and fears and feeling proud to say I love you right out loud. Dreams and schemes and circus crowds. I've looked at life that way. There's so much beauty in the innocence and childlike nature we see here, right? And you know, a couple weeks ago, Michelle gave this whole teaching on all that we have to learn from the wisdom of that childlike spirit, right? From children. And shouldn't we feel this way, right? Shouldn't we allow our emotions and our feelings to come through? Shouldn't we show our tears and our fears? Shouldn't we say, I love you more often? This, friends, is why both sides are valuable, because we need the innocence, right? We even need aspects of the naivete. But if you live long enough, now old friends, they're acting strange. They shake their heads and tell me that I've changed. Well, something's lost, but something's gained in living every day. If you live long enough, authentically, right, we are going to experience loss and even a lack of understanding from others. Because if you're being your true self, you're not going to be able to please everybody, right? Sometimes it's the harder choice to be authentic because of this very thing. Something's lost, but something's gained in living every day. True living, truly engaging with life and reality, is a give and take. It's something that is unavoidable. We see this dynamic in all kinds of places. We see it in the dynamic between age and wisdom, right? That as we grow older and as we experience life and life humbles us, we naturally develop wisdom. And at the same time, as you age, you lose some of the physical capacity and capabilities of your youth, right? It's just the give and take of life. How about regret and the lessons we learn from it, right? Like we have things in life that we look back and we wish we did differently, we wish happened differently, and yet they taught us things so that now we would say, well, if I could go back, I would change that, right? But the you that would go back and change how you acted is only you because that very thing happened, right? And the lesson you learned from that mistake or that failure. This is why so often we say spirituality is an act of letting go, right? Because we recognize that something's lost and something's gained if we want to live truly and honestly. But I've looked at life from both sides now, from win and lose, and still somehow. It's life's illusions I recall. I really don't know life at all. So you might be out there today and you might say, I remember the innocence of youth and I know the maturity of age, right? I've felt the light of success and the shadow of failure and the lessons that come from it. And really all I have to say is, I really don't know. I really don't know. And maybe that's okay. The monk Thomas Merton said this: you do not need to know precisely what is happening or exactly where it is all going. What you need is to recognize the possibilities and challenges offered by the present moment and to embrace them with courage, faith, and hope. How many of us sometimes struggle with that phrase, I don't know? I don't know. I think for a lot of us, we fear that admitting that we don't know is like saying, I guess I'm just living life in the dark, right? Without a sure path forward. For me, the faith system that I grew up in really prioritized knowing and prioritized certainty and prioritized having the right answers. And if I were ever at that time in my life to come across someone who says, I don't know, and yet I'm okay, I'm comfortable with that, I would have just said, well, that's too bad, right? They really just don't know. But I've come, friends, to believe that I don't know, I don't understand, is one of the most holy, sacred, spiritual responses to life. There is a beautiful surrender to the mystery in saying, I don't know. It's not a rejection of the idea of God or the idea of the divine. It's actually an embrace. To say I don't know is to say I'm making space that there is something beyond and bigger than my understanding. Now, I don't know doesn't mean I'm not going to try. It doesn't mean I'm not going to be vulnerable. It doesn't mean I'm going to shy away from life. It just means I'm going to do all these things with a sense of humility, with some reverence, with some awe. And all of that actually gives way to a deeper sense of presence, because when we can let go of the need to have all the answers, we can be present with what is. How many of us have gone through this journey where we could say, stage 1, I know exactly how life works, right? And it's simple. And then stage 2, well, now I know how life works, and it's actually complex, and it's painful, and it's going to disappoint you. But then you get to this third stage where you say, I don't know, and that's okay, right? This process, this cycle that we go through has gone by many names. And it's something that's universal, and we see it in nature. In its most basic form, this 3-stage journey might be labeled as life, death, and resurrection, a cycle that we see everywhere. Some philosophers have called it the journey from naivete into disillusionment into a second naivete. That first stage, naivete, ignorance is bliss, right? And sometimes it really is. But you move into the disillusionment, what we might even call a death. Maybe it's a death of beliefs. It's a death of how you once saw the world, a dream of how things would work out, right? And it's in those moments that we say, well, okay, now I really know how life works. I was so naive back then, right? But there is an opportunity to move into this second naivete, what we might call the resurrection phase, or even this both sides now moment, where we have humility, not because we know all the answers, but we're choosing simplicity. And it's not just a return back to the innocence that we knew before, because we also hold the things that happened along the way, the pain, the disappointment, the loss, we hold those as valuable too. They are as much a part of our story as anything else. And so we can hold both sides. And when I look at this community, Aldea, I see a both sides now community. See, many of us grew up in a form of religion, and maybe in our youth, we took it at face value, right? We would have said, yeah, the Bible is just like a user manual, and everything needs to be taken at face value. But also in this community, we aren't looking at our upbringing. We aren't looking at where we came from. And we aren't fully just rejecting everything outright either, right? We aren't throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We've been able to look at our spiritual journeys from both sides now, find the things that ring true for us and are of value, and hold on to those, and accept that we're making space for the journey that we've been on. Not an either-or mentality, but a both-and mentality. And both-and is not easy, because we live in a world that often likes to make things very black and white. And to live in this nuanced space can be very threatening to a world that doesn't know how to interact with it. When we talk about non-duality, often what we're saying is the categories that we've been handed simply just don't work for us. It's like we've been given a multiple choice question, and our answer is far more nuanced than any of the choices being given. Father Richard Rohr says this about his own journey: the process of transformation was slow, and the realizations that came with it were not either or. They were great big both and realizations. I could transcend precisely because I was able to include and broaden. It seems we all begin in naivete and eventually return to a second naivete or simplicity, whether willingly or on our deathbed. This blessed simplicity is calm, knowing, patient, inclusive, and self-forgetful. It helps us move beyond anger, alienation, and ignorance. I believe that this is the very goal of mature adulthood and mature religion. This, for me, is reminiscent of my own journey with God. When I was growing up, I would have said, I know God, right? I have all the answers. I understand God in the way that I need to, right? And I'm right. and ultimately, along the way, through various experiences that I had, I ultimately ended up in a place where I would have said, well, there is no God. And everything that I've been told before, it was all a lie. And moving into that both sides now place, I can now say, I don't have all the answers, right? And in fact, maybe the experience of God is something that is accessed beyond knowing to begin with. It isn't about having the right answers. It isn't about having the right knowledge, but it's an experience. This is why so often, on stage we would say, as you would label the divine, right? Whatever name for God or how you understand it works for you, is because there's so much space for different experiences, right? It's something to be experienced, not to have all the answers for. And so for me, in some ways it's a return to my childhood, in the sense that I've returned back to a relationship with something that I would call God. But I'm also grateful for everything that happened along the way, even the things that I lost along the way. Because if it weren't for those moments of doubt, if it weren't for those moments of disillusionment, I wouldn't have arrived at this space of both and. Where else in our lives does this dynamic show up, right? Do we move into a both sides now kind of place? Maybe it's your experiences with family, right? Like when we're young, our parents are mythical creatures, right? They're superhuman. And then something happens along the way and we recognize that our parents are just human beings. Maybe it's because they fail us and we don't know how to relate to them. But if we move into that both sides now place, we can make space for them as the human beings and still re-engage that relationship and even have recognition for what space they did hold in your life at one point. And that could be a pathway to healing. Maybe it's the same thing with politics, right? When we're young, we don't really pay much attention to it. Things are simple. Someone somewhere else is taking care of things for me, right? And then you get older, you start getting more engaged in what's going on in the world, and it feels like a mess, right? It feels so complicated. And maybe you can move into a space where you recognize, yes, there's so much to be figured out. There's so much healing that needs to happen and so much restructuring that needs to happen. And at the same time, I can't let this steal my joy. I can't let this take all of my energy. So I need to create space in my own life to move into a place where I could say, hey, it's okay not to have all the answers. It's okay not to know. Maybe this is even the experience that we have with ourselves, right? When we're young, we think we know exactly who we are and who we're going to be. And then we get older, and all of that gets thrown out of the window, right? And we have these identity crises, and things happen where who we are is called into question. But we can ultimately move into this place where we would say, hey, I don't need to know everything about who I am because I'm not even just one thing. And in fact, letting go of having this perfect answer of what my identity is makes space for this diversity of who I am. So we include and we broaden, as Richard Rohr says. See, the problem is sometimes we can get very narrow, right, on either of these sides. It can be all that we see. And it's that third stage that allows us to zoom out, right, and recognize that both are valid in their own way, right? This is what we would call paradox, where two things that seem to be contradicting can be true at the same time. And Jung said this about paradox: it is one of our most valuable spiritual possessions, that only the paradox comes anywhere near to comprehending the fullness of life. That maybe for us to experience the fullness of life, we need to make space for the beauty of life and the tragedy of life, for the joy and for the grief. An embrace of paradox is to say, hey, no one has all the answers, but life can still be meaningful in the mystery as we experience it together. Maybe for you, the biggest step so far in your spiritual journey has been leaving that first stage, right? Has been acknowledging, hey, there were things that I used to believe that no longer resonate with me, right? There was a person that I used to think I was, and that was thrown out the window. And maybe that has left you in that stage of disenchantment or disillusionment. And maybe it's hard for you to reconcile who you used to be and who you are now, let alone where you might be going. But if you are in that stage, if that's you today, I would encourage you to ask yourself, find something in that first stage, find something in that optimism, right? In that simplicity that was of value to you. What would you want to take with you if you weren't to throw the baby out with the bathwater? What would be of value to you that you would hold on to at this point in life? Because you can't move into that second naivete. You can't move into the resurrection if you don't at first honor all the parts of you that have come before, all the stages that you've moved through. And what we find is that what matters is not arriving at some point where we have all the answers, but rather, as we found in the first week of this series, it's about the movement along the way, the movement along these stages. Or what we found in the second week of this series, that it's in allowing ourselves to continue to change. And as we found last week, just remember that you're not alone along the way. So where does that leave us now? Awe, reverence, space for the mystery. For me, I love to identify with the mystics, and in this case, I would say Joni is one of them, because to be able to say, hey, I don't know, and yet that actually opens me up deeper to the experience of life, that is what we would call an appreciation of mystery. And as Einstein said, one of the people who we most associate with having the answers, but he said the most beautiful experience we can have is the mysterious. It is the fundamental emotion that stands at the cradle of true art and true science. So friends, my hope for us is that we would be able to celebrate the part of us that is innocent, that is joyful, that is optimistic, that is simple, right? And at the same time, that we would have compassion for the parts of ourselves that through the pain of life had become cynical, have become defensive, right? And in that act of loving our previous selves, we find a spaciousness to hold both. And from that place, a way of being, a way of living in the world, not of knowing and having all the answers, but of deepening our experience and feeling life fully. I want to close with a poem by the poet Rainer Maria Rilke. And as I read this, I just encourage you, I think of it almost like a prayer. So I'm going to read it slow, and I would just encourage you, if you feel comfortable, you want to close your eyes, just let these words wash over you. Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given you, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer.